I was in DC during the financial crisis, covered all that. That's when you and I started talking when I was at Fox. But the thing that upsets me about where we are now is that, I have enjoyed a 20-year trajectory of growth in investments, and it feels as if it was because of the artificially low interest rates that it's
Absolutely.
not real. And now what I'm worried about, because my timeline to recover from that is shorter. Hopefully, I'll live as long as my folks. But if we correct this, then won't I and millions of Americans who are Gen X lose out?
Well, as I said, I think that the path forward, there's a very narrow path forward to correct this, and I think the only palatable way to correct it is probably going to be through through inflation. So the fact that you are an asset holder means, maybe not on a real basis, but on a nominal basis, you'll be at least kind of keeping pace with what is going on. It's going to be really hard for those younger people who haven't had the opportunity to accumulate assets, and we're seeing that already, right? We're seeing that with the fact that they can't get into houses,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of young people don't think that they'll ever live the American dream. So I think the likely outcome is just more of a divide, which we know is not a good thing for a country. It creates all kinds of civil unrest, and it's a very difficult thing to plot our way out of. I think most likely there is certainly a scenario where they just let everything fall apart, and if that's the case, that's really ugly, and we could have a whole different
Yeah.
conversation about that.
Yeah.
But I think the politically,
Yeah.
realistic way is that most people, they'll see everything going up, but they won't understand that their purchasing power has been diminished.
Uh, what worries me is I do believe that we live in the greatest country on the planet. I think that the United States provides all of us the ability, especially with the changes that our democracy and our republic have made since you and I first came on the scene in the 60s and 70s. But the opportunity that exists when I hear younger people who understandably have a right to be angry about the plate they're being served, I then hear them talking about calling for the destruction of Western civilization in the United States. And I'm saying, what? That just doesn't make sense to me. I mean, look, we have hard choices to make with the government and with our spending and what we're going to do in the future, but we can do those together. Destroying it doesn't seem to me to be a rational option. I mean, are you encountering that in your part of the country?
Yeah, I mean, envy is a hell of a drug. And I think that unfortunately has been part of the far left agenda, the Bernie Sanders and AOC wing of the Democratic Party, where, they go on their oligarchy tour on their private jets, by
Yes.
the
Yeah,
way.
yeah.
Bernie Sanders with his 3 homes to tell you how bad capitalism is, and,
Hmm.
how awful things are and how everything needs to be destroyed. And we do need major renovation here. There are a lot of things that are broken, but and it's sorry for being PC, but you know me. We're the skinniest kid at fat camp, so
Hmm.
we're not great. But look at everybody else in the world, and there
Right.
isn't like, oh, here's this other bastion of freedom and choice and capitalism and property rights that we're going to end up. We could just go there and basically go back to the early American experiment. So we have the best foundation, even with all of its problems, to fix and
Hmm.
rebuild and remodel. And I think that needs to be the discussion. But it is too easy to point out the envy and to point out these disparities, which, frankly, were not fair, but that's where we are today. And, to say, oh, it needs to be torn down, because a lot of the people who are listening to it really don't have the experience outside of this regime and scenario.
Yeah, I got a flash alert just as we were coming into the stream that it looks as if the reconciliation bill, the spending bill, is going to get, passed. My question is, if the making the tax cuts permanent and some of the other things that are going to happen is going to drive up our debt,
Yep.
I'm not sure what you cut, because you and I both know Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid account for a large portion of
Yep.
U.S. government spending, and none of us want to cut defense spending, which is now going to be over $1 trillion. What do you do?
So, I mean, there needs to be some really strong choreography. And I think that Scott Bessent, his plan was, let's take our deficit that's, running 6 to 7%, wartime level deficit, about double kind of what it's been historically, as a percentage of GDP. And let's try and get that down to 3. Like that would be a big home run. And where you'd start, I think, is you'd start with what Elon Musk was uncovering in terms of Doge. That's the low hanging fruit, the waste, fraud, and abuse. Yes, we spend a lot on Social Security and Medicare, but what percentage of that is fraudulent? Yes, we spend a lot on defense spending, but certainly there's some waste in there that we can get rid of. And then across the board, there's all kinds of places. So I think that in each bucket, you can go in and be surgical and get rid of what isn't necessary. That's what you would do, right? If you were running a company. And then you can go in after you kind of write that and have that, very careful choreography and order of operations to coming up with a longer term plan to fix Social Security and Medicare. But the idea that there's not all, $1 trillion or more of waste. And I think they'll probably find some unpalatable way to maybe get interest expense down that's going to cause some inflation. But again, I don't think we're going to have a choice here.
I want to start wrapping up. I am curious. You just brought up Social Security. You understand money much better than most of us, and finance, and also long-term finance.
Yes.
Any thoughts on how I use the metrics regarding Social Security that the trustees are saying, 83 cents on the dollar if we don't do anything. So not bankrupt, but it's not what we're promising retirees. And 1 in 5 Americans receive Social Security. It's 55 million old age retirees. If you add in disability and all of it, it's like 78 million. How would you fix this?
Well, first of all, you and I differ a little bit. I personally think it's the second cousin of a Ponzi scheme. You do not get paid unless somebody else paid in. There is nothing sitting in that trust other than a quote unquote IOU, and who finances the IOU? Oh, by the way, we do, and we do it with debt. So there's nothing in there. We're just hoping that people continue to work and continue to pay in so that you get your payout. Ultimately, over time, if it really was our money, it would be in individual accounts, right? I would own it. I would know what the account is. I could pass that on to my heirs. It would be very, very clear. And that would have been a really smart thing to do, but we're far away from that. So I think that you need to come up with something that stages in, right? Where you start with the people who, are in retirement or getting Social Security, you're not taking away their benefits. But as you kind of go down, you have to change the parameters of the time for retirement and how much they're getting, and maybe the ideal option is you means test it and you get people to opt out of it, but you can only do that, and people are only agreeing to that if you put some reins on Congress to say that if I'm going to do this, you have to give up something too, and you have to be fiscally responsible, because nobody wants to make a change if there isn't going to be the commensurate change from Congress long term. And I think that's what makes this virtually impossible, is that if you get Social Security in a good place, if you're able to cut that spending, Congress is just going to come back and change it and just spend somewhere else. So I think we need to figure out how we can get a hold of Congress and kind of hold them to a more constitutional approach to spending before we can even talk about, because I do think, there are people like me, I would opt out. I'd be fine if that meant that I could get some other things on the other side. And I just don't believe that we could do that. So I think that's the conversation, and it's going to be a hard one to have because politicians going to politician.
Yes. This is what you and I agree on many things on Social Security. You and I disagree on some things because I think, I'm going to talk about this in just a second, but I do think we need to, and I heard you say this, preserve Social Security, but then gradually step down, giving younger people a chance to get out and take control of their own retirement future. And I just don't have the brain power to figure out how you do that. I don't think Congress has the brain power to figure out how to do that either.
Well, I think you would do something along the lines of that maybe you keep the amount that you pay in, but the employer match goes to kind of the pot for the people who aren't paying it. And there's a way to model it out. But again, nobody's going to do this until we get some assurances that Congress isn't just going to screw us over in a different way.
Want to bet? All right, so let me let you have the last word before I thank you. And it's a real pleasure to reconnect. The newsletter again at carolroth.com. Make sure that you check this out. Congratulations on the success of the following speaks for itself, but on the books as well. Are you working on a new book? Is there another one coming out?
So I had a historical fiction book that I'd been working on that's like a whole other thing that may or may not ever come out, but not another nonfiction book right now. There have been a few things I've toyed with, and there just hasn't been anything that's grabbed me enough to
Mhm.
say I'm going to do it. Or things are moving so quickly that my other fear is because it takes a long time to get a book to market, that by the time I write it, that it's going to be obsolete. And that's, whether we're talking about AI or we're talking about our financial
Mhm.
situation, things are moving really rapidly right now. So you have to, you kind of time it and be thinking a year ahead, which You Will Own Nothing was perfect. And I did that, but that's not an easy thing to do. And it's certainly not an easy thing to do right now.
I will tell you, you just brought up AI, and I'm working in AI now. I left the media world before it kicked me to the curb, as it's doing to all of my friends and colleagues. But it is fascinating what the company I'm working for has developed, and I watch the different iterations of things that are happening. You can have augmented or automatic, or it can be with human hybrid. But
Right.
it is fascinating, and my friends who are lawyers, I'll say it will never replace lawyers, and I'm like, already has. I don't, and it is. Then friends who are saying they're telling the kids to become plumbers and electricians. Well, guess what? They're creating the robots that might be able to do that. Now, next year, no. The year after, no. But 5 years, 10 years, here it
Yeah.
comes.
I'm just waiting for AI to replace Congress. Then we'll be in a good space.
That's going to be the social media meme. I'm just waiting for AI to replace Congress. Last thought. What do you want to leave people with?
Listen, things are changing rapidly with our fiscal foundation. Protect yourself. You're not going to be able to control the macro, but you can control the micro. So do the best you can in terms of your behaviors. I know personal austerity is not particularly fun, but if you could maybe forego that trip or that kind of extra experience and put that money into investments and have that diversified portfolio, it's going to create less stress for you. It's going to take away some of that stress over your lifetime. So go out and own lots of things.